Well, I want to welcome everyone that's attending live to Hawthorn University's Holistic Health and Nutrition webinar. And thank you so much for joining us as we welcome DeAnna Batdorff, who's returning for part 2 of her exciting presentation, Traditional Tools in Nutrition. This will be such an essential continuation of this topic. DeAnna will continue to teach us food as medicine through an Ayurvedic lens and how this can empower each individual to listen to and then understand their body communications and to take action through food choices. So I also want to let you know that there's a handout that will be associated with this. The handout will be the same as the slides that you'll be seeing, but you can download that and keep it for yourself, or you can download it now and follow along as well and take notes with it. And just I want to give you a little bit of background on DeAnna. She's the founder of the DeAnna Center in Sonoma County, California, and the Certified Ayurvedic Education Program. She holds many licenses and certifications in cosmetology, osteology, massage therapy, planetary herbs, clinical aromatherapy, nutritional counseling, and has completed many clinical internships as well. She's a contributor to several publications and has been sought out for interviews and as a featured speaker. DeAnna also volunteers her time generously. She created the Ayurvedic Donation Clinic for the underserved population and is the executive director of Ayushati Health Foundation. It's a nonprofit supporting people through the heart of Ayurveda. She's also a clinical practitioner and educator and has been working with HIV/AIDS clientele for the last 30 years, and autoimmune disorders are her specialty, as well as working with high-risk health issues and rehabilitation. DeAnna supported over 100,000 clients in her Ayurvedic practice and is ultimately an advocate for prevention, education, and the human body, elemental theory, and what it means to stay or become healthy for each individual. You can sure find out more about DeAnna and the work she does via her website at thedeannacenter.com. DeAnna says Ayurvedic self-care is the best medicine we have. We're sure going to learn more about it today. We had encouraged you to review part 1 of the Hawthorn webinar in our archives, and we will briefly review it. So if you didn't see part 1 and you're showing up for part 2, you'll get a little review, but part 1 is jam-packed with information and worth a lookup. So today we'll review what Ayurveda is and the elements and doshas, and in part 2 we'll continue with the foods and remedies that benefit each individual's constitution, and that will include examples of how to apply the elemental remedies in specific circumstances, and then covering the best foods for the cold, dry, hot, wet, and the food cravings for these same cold, dry, wet, hot, and wet as well. And DeAnna will conclude with spicing up our life with the use of spices as medicine and flavor, as well as for satisfying cravings. You know, we're really going to talk about adding flavor and plant medicine to a meal. And then she'll end with the rare spices and the global blends that are really typically underutilized. DeAnna, I really appreciate you covering such a wide range on this very important topic. So I'm excited to have you here. I don't want anybody to miss anything. We'll likely go 75 minutes for this presentation, and we'll follow that with your questions and have an answer period. And the recording will be available for replay on our website in just a few days. If you have questions at any point, you don't have to wait to the end. You can write them into your webinar panel, and I will get them to DeAnna in the right timing. Okay, I should tell you who I am, Paula Bartholomew. I'm one of the founders of Hawthorn, and that's enough with that. And so let's bring on DeAnna. Such a pleasure to have you back, DeAnna. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Paula. It's been nice knowing you for so many years. And like I said last time, you were absolutely a very important nutrition mentor for me 22 years ago when you were my primary teacher in my nutrition course. So I just want to say thank you so much for everything you do out in the world.
Appreciate that too. I'm eager to learn from you here today. Your expertise is phenomenal, and you're just really going to help us understand. And then the practical application of it is what I'm really excited about, to be able to incorporate this information in our practices and in our lives. So when you're ready to begin, I'm going to give it to you.
Okay, well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to do just a little review, even though there is a handout and you may have reviewed already. This is a large science of medicine. It's called Ayurveda. And Ayurveda means science of life or life knowledge. And really, it's a balancing act. So it's this beautiful science that's based on what you see is what is going on. And it's about reading your symptoms and understanding how to recognize yourself as an elemental being. Ether, air, fire, water, earth. The elements are in everything. They are one thing that are absolutely undeniable, whether we are looking at food or emotions or physical, or whether we are looking to even, let's be honest, even pieces of furniture in our space. One might be soft and one might be hard, and they come from different trees, and everything comes from the elements. As they say, all things made of matter matter. And so that's really how Ayurveda approaches health. What you see is what is going on. And I'll do some symptomology, but really that was covered in the last one. What I'm really going to go in tonight, once we cover just the basics, is going to be all the remedies. And I'm going to keep them really food specific, and since that is my primary medicine, and in Ayurveda, primary medicine. Now, when we're learning Ayurveda, made up of these elements, ether, air, fire, water, earth, we have 5 elements that make up our 4 seasons, which is winter, spring, summer, fall. Now, winter is seen as cold, okay, which is ether. So ether is winter, cold. Then we have this beautiful idea of spring, and it is in the dry. You know, we have to water the seed for something to happen, but the sun is coming out and we have this drying out, and it is of spring. And then we have hot, which is summer. And then we also have wet, which makes up our time of fall and autumn. And so this is really how Ayurveda starts breaking down this idea of getting to these 3 primary words that are used all the time in Ayurveda, which is Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, which are the doshas. And doshas mean characteristics, or like a primary way of being. They call it the humors. So we have these 5 elements that make up our 4 seasons, but they are so intertwined, like ether and air working together, right? Empty space and something moving in it. They work together all the time. So ether and air, which also makes up cold and dry, is vata. Now, how do you want to understand this Sanskrit word? And again, in your handout, you can read a lot more about it. But it means change, the word vata. So change means there could be too much of it, and then you would be too vata, too much change. You could have too little change, and you would actually not have enough ether, air, vata. And then that's going to change the balance amongst all the elements, because each element feeds one another. So you want this really great balance of vata, and then the next one, pitta, which means focus. And it's a fire, it's fire and water. It's actually things that are about assimilating and absorbing in your body. And then we want that to really help with the follow through of fall, which is what this time is about. And that is kapha. And kapha means nourish. It also is represented as wet like tears. And it is ether, it is water and earth. So we have this word vata from the elements that is ether and air. Change. They say the leaf never lands in the same place twice. And then we have the word pitta, which is a focus, and it's fire and water, and it's about transition and changing and moving things, really transformational. And that is going to be the word pitta. And then we have kapha, which is this beautiful water earth, and it is of nourish. So if we really want to just look at, like, okay, let's take the Sanskrit out of it for a minute. It is a balancing act of change, focus, and nourish. So not changing too much or too little, or making sure you really change when it's necessary or it's time, and being able to go with it when change is upon you. And then we have this idea of, and in the body, by the way, change is going to be gaseous exchange. So it's going to be everything about air moving or chemicals breaking down, like your macronutrients becoming micronutrients and becoming gaseous so we can absorb them. And then we have that Pitta fire, and that focus is really about how am I going to transform that macronutrients and make it turn into a liquid so it can be absorbed in the body. So we need gases to work for us, Vata, and we need assimilation and absorption to work for us. So we have liquid exchange. And then really the most important part about Kapha, nourish, is going to be really this idea of like we must be hydrated enough to have our flow. So think about a river or the ocean or a stream, and when it's flowing really effortlessly and beautifully, you're like, oh, I'm so relaxed. Well, we're also 60 to 70% water, just like the earth. And so the concept would be that we need to make sure our tides are coming in and going out, like at the ocean, coming in and going out, or that river is continuing to flow. And this is really what being nourished is about. It's about being hydrated and your fluid exchange and making sure your water works, fluids getting from one place to another. And so your waterworks are working for you. So this is just the simplest concept I can really bring forward in what is Ayurveda. Now, there's another little piece of it before we get into the real remedies and just really what do we do for each one of these. And that is that they broke down every organ, channel, and tissue and gland, including a whole lot of our emotions, in fact, 5 for Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And they started laying out what are the rivers and oceans and the streams that make up Kapha organs, channels, tissues. What is gaseous exchange, like your lungs expanding and contracting, or the peristalsis of your intestines breaking down gases? Those are all Vata. And what are the assimilating and absorbing organs and channels and tissues that make up Pitta? So this is all in the handout, so you can do your review again, or you can say, okay, this is making sense now. I've read through it. But this is really the bottom line of Ayurveda, is like, how do we tick just like our environment? So we have our environment, outer, and we have our inner environment. And it's about making sure that we are recognizing that we are of the earth and we are mimicking the earth. And really, if you start looking, at all the organs, channels, tissues, and get into real clear physiology, this is such a brilliant science that has, kept me engaged for 30 years. So I don't think I would keep doing something for this long if it wasn't really showing worth. And so that's what's kept me here, is like, wow, that symptom was of hot, and it is Pitta, and it's Pitta in the liver. Or, whoa, that really is a gaseous exchange issue, having too much belching or too much releasing of gas. And then how do we change that gaseous exchange? So everything is looked at by symptomology. And then pathology, like how does one thing affect the other in the body? So they're always looking at us as a whole unit. If you have a skin condition, you have the lymph, the blood, and the muscles that feed the skin, but you also have, the organ that formed the blood, which is going to be your liver. And so we're always looking at like what organ, what channel, what tissue is really in relation to our symptoms. And then here's the kicker. Here's the most amazing thing about Ayurveda, if you ask me. It's about opposites. So let's just give a moment. We do Ayurveda all day long, because if I get hot, I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to take my jacket off. If I get cold, I'm going to put my jacket on. If I get thirsty, I'm going to drink some of my water here. And if I feel really wet, which is the idea of things congested or stuck or sticky, they're not really flowing and getting out, I might need to blow my nose, or I might need to go use the restroom. So these are the ways they really look at it. They're like, figure out what this is elementally, track the symptom, track it to the parts of the body that correlate, then do the opposite. Another really cool thing in Ayurveda is this opposite starts with something called Virya. And Virya, Virya, just the simple of this, and we'll get into this, but you'll see this throughout the rest of the class. Virya is the highest potential of possible change in Ayurveda. Literally the highest potential of possible change. You have a symptom, you want to get rid of it, it needs to change. So they look at that as hot and cold. So say I'm making an aromatherapeutic essential oil blend for a specific health issue. My first question as a practitioner is always going to be, am I making this more of a cooling formula, or am I making this more of a warming formula? It might sound so basic that you're like, hot and cold, come on. But guess what? Nothing changes without the balancing act of life, you know? I mean, the plant's not going to keep living if you don't water it. You know, the fire isn't going to go out, and I'll knock on wood on that one because I live in Sonoma County, but the fire isn't going to go out if I just sit there and watch it. I'm going to have to water it. I'm going to have to water that plant. I'm going to have to calm down that fire. And so everything is looking at this hot and cold, and which one is the client exhibiting, and then I'm going to choose the opposite when I go to formulate. Then I can think about what are warming liver herbs, what are cooling liver herbs, what are warming muscle herbs, what are cooling muscle herbs. So I really do look at all of my organs, channels, and tissues, and I like to break down my plants and my remedies according to cooling and warming. And then usually I have a little few ones that I'm like, these are really hot, so I have to know how to use them. And I need to know which ones are really, really cold, so I know how to use them. But most of them, you know, you're just really being like, whoa, I'm hot, so I need an essential oil or a plant or a food that is going to take my jacket off of my health. You know, it's going to cool me down. So this virya is such a special detail when we start looking at food and remedies. Because when I go to eat a meal, I really want to consider, and it could be very easy, like it's cold outside. Well, guess what? I probably need more warming food because I want to be the opposite of my season. But sometimes you could have eaten not the right thing, or who knows what kind of emotional process you're going through, or what your genetics are, and you might already still be heated. Like I'm very Pitta hot. So even in the winter, you know, it's like I don't necessarily have like a bundled jacket on. I still have short sleeves on. And probably for my husband, it would be a little cold in here. So we naturally run a little more hot or a little more cold, and we naturally run a little more dry or a little bit more like what's considered sluggish or slow. So you really want to figure this ratio out. And we won't cover it tonight, but there is a questionnaire that is included in the handout. So you can actually track your symptoms, and you can figure out if you're more hot or cold, and if you're more wet or dry. And then we start getting into the fun part, which I'll try to play out a little bit tonight, which is combinations. So what if I have a cold kidney and I have hot liver? So I'm not going to make this so basic that we don't think dynamic, because we are dynamic beings. The elements are dynamic and our health is dynamic. So there are going to be some things where you're like, but I'm hot and cold. What do I do now? Well, usually they say if it's cold outside, you start with warming, and you just make sure that there's a lot of alkaline, cold pH in that, say, stew or soup or broth. So we would think about, like, you could have a warm bowl of soup, but you could have a bunch of cilantro and kale and bok choy and celery and coriander and cumin seed. And right there, you would have made a fully alkaline but wet, nourishing, warming bowl of soup. So there's always a way to combine. And the other thing I like about Ayurveda is there's also always a way to create a little bit of a compromise. So say, for instance, somebody says, let's go to dinner. And then I'm like, okay. And then they're like, oh, I know this amazing, you know, Indian restaurant, you know what I mean? But Indian food, I love it. And it's good spices and it's great for digestion. but it might be more oily than I eat, or I'm not sure where that restaurant, necessarily shops for their food. So the quality might be a little different. So I just want to be smart in my compromising and my, kind of like playing this balancing act out. So I might be really smart about what I order, but I might say, hey, can I have some extra cilantro mint chutney to go with that? And I might even get a cooling yogurt lassi. And then I eat less of the food because the lassi is a little more filling, and the lassi and the mint chutney are cooling in the meal. Whereas if if it was hot outside and you ordered that Indian food really spicy and it was really oily, hot is just going to make more hot. Cold is going to make more cold. Dry is going to make more dry. And this is where cravings come into play. Really, honestly, this is where cravings come in, because a lot of people will ask me, well, why do I crave crispy, crunchy, munchy, crunchy food when I'm already dry? Like, wouldn't my body want me to get the opposite? And I'm like, well, your body is saying, DeAnna, you're dry. My body isn't necessarily, in early stages, it wasn't trained to say, you need wet. But I do want to let you know that I have seen with my clients, and I've absolutely seen with myself, that does become true in time, which means the more you use this balancing act, the more you might actually develop more healthy cravings, because you start having different ways of communicating and listening to your body's communications. And so then I might even be like, oh, I'm so frustrated. And then I'm like, okay, frustrated is anger. Anger is hot. I don't really need to go and, have some fiery food right now. I should probably recognize that I'm fired up, and I should choose something cold for that next meal. So we're always playing with these foods. And remember, a hot food and a cold food combined makes a warm food. So there's always a way you can get right down the middle. And that's what they talk about in Ayurveda, in the concepts of feeding a family or feeding a whole household, right? You're like, well, I can't cook for everybody, and I'm the one cooking tonight. So you want to make a base kind of nice balanced, a little bit of hot, a little bit of cold, a little bit of nourishing, a little bit of cleansing, which is what we do for drying things out. And everybody can eat that. And then maybe you have those extra chutneys or a pesto or different spice shakers that are on your table. And then that allows each person to really trust their taste buds and be able to say, I want a little bit more of that coriander, and I need a little more of that good salt, whatever from there. And then somebody can really tailor that meal specifically to them. But you will be able to cook for a whole group of people. It's called cooking tridoshic. And it just means that you need a really good balance of like your proteins, your fats, and your carbs. And let's remember, carbs is not a bad word. The largest group we have in the world of carbohydrates are vegetables. Carbs are full of fiber. And so we need that fiber because it sops up our toxins and helps bulk things up, and it helps us get toxins out of the body. So, it doesn't have to be bread or a whole bunch of gluten. It could just be like a lot of good roughage, leafy greens, or a lot of vegetables on your plate. And that means you did bring in your healthy carbs. So always a way you can cook and then decide what you need as you go along. And we'll keep playing with this idea as we go. But that would be pretty much my opener. And there's a lot more here in this handout for you to learn from. By all means, I invite you to look at it if you haven't already. But I'm going to go ahead and have James move on. Here we go to our Vata, Pitta, and Kapha pages. Okay. Again, I'm not here to reteach what Vata is, but how nice that I have these nice little one-pagers for each one of the doshas, showing you what might have happened. And you can see it has the little ether air symbol at the top. And here's the symptoms. And I like to break down symptoms according to parts of the body. So you can see how it's going to show you what is Vata in the lymph, in the kidneys, the intestines, and the nervous system. And it's not just 4 random systems we chose here. These are the 4 primary places in the body that Vata, if you're born with a lot of ether air, if you're born with, low blood pressure or you have frequent urination, all of these things that are on the list, these are the things you'd want to safeguard too. So if you don't have those nervous system symptoms, you might want to also know, like, oh, if I get insomnia, that's going to be harder on me if I'm more vata in my constitution. And when you're looking at a symptom list, you want to make sure you really think chronic, unless something's acute and you want to just do it for the moment. But like, you might have known all of these. So just keep in mind, like, what if I had for a long time and I still want it to change? And then consider checking off your list and seeing how many of these do you have, helping you figure out how much vata do you have. The next page here is really important, and we're actually going to cover it in more detail later in the class. There's a whole page for each one. These are just your, fun little look-ats. Here's the Pitta: lymph, cardiovascular, digestion, and skin, the 4 primary places where vata really affects the body pretty quickly. And it'll show you if you have more pitta or not. And then over here, you're going to see, and again, we'll be covering it, this beautiful list of alkaline cooling foods. And I tried to do the same under each one because I really love the symmetry of a class telling me the same information so I can really grow. So it'll go over spices, supportive taste factors, and then, what is needed, and then what to avoid. And then we'll also be looking at herbal support characteristics. And then we'll look at what's some inspirational support. But again, this will be on the next page as we go. So let's just give Kapha a look, and then we'll be complete with our review. And then with Kapha, it's lymph, lungs, circulation, and metabolism. So they're the ones who get more low metabolism and get sluggish easy. So they have to really consider what they're putting in their body, because they need more cleansing and they need more motivating foods. So this is the raw foodist, whereas vata needed more cooked foods. It doesn't mean you can't eat raw food, but vata needs cooked, Kapha needs raw, and actually Pitta needs half cooked, half raw. And then you can think about what your combos are, and then that'll change how much of the cooked and raw that you need. But these are going to be all the cleansing spices and taste factors that are going to really put you a little bit more into a detox, because that's primarily what's needed when there's more Kapha in the body. Okay, and again, we're going to be going over these pages. Okay, this is a good one. So here we are with these pages. Who needs what? Now, even before this, I just want to give a beautiful Ayurvedic, I want to paint a beautiful Ayurvedic picture. So first off, who needs what? Well, we all need, the size of our hands is a meal. Okay, and natural cupping is the height of the meal. So it's called the Anjali. Your hand is called an Anjali, and we always eat 2 Anjalis of food. They say the sizes of our hands are exactly going to fit the filling up of our stomach. So not only do we eat 2 hands of food 3 times a day, but we also have 2 belches in each meal. And you may need to pay attention a little bit more. And if your metabolism's really low, it might take more spices to even have your stomach talk a bit more. But we do have 2 belches when we're half full in the stomach, and then when we're 3/4 full and there's still room for expansion. And that means you won't overeat, and you'll always eat the amount that your stomach can handle digesting. So these are just 2 things to keep in mind on who needs what. We need 2 handfuls of food, and you never eat past the 2nd belch. And the last detail in Ayurveda is no cold water with meals, because you put your stomach fire out. And so these are just the primary who needs what. Now, what does vata need? If you run cold, if you run dry, if you have low blood pressure, if you have ether in air, or you leave your body really easy, or you have fear or anxiety, these are all things that we call vata. So all of the remedies are going to be the opposite of cold and dry. So let's look at this list. Warming wet foods, stews, broths, soups, cooked. I notice a lot of people who are vata, they're very spiritually driven, so they're usually health oriented, and they might even be considering like raw food must be more healthy. but in actuality, raw food is roughage and it's alkaline, so it's a little bit too cold and dry as an all-the-time meal. So you want to pair, if you love raw food, which I do, you want to pair it with a soup or put a bunch of arugula on top of your food. And speaking of arugula, that takes us to some really primary things that are needed here, which is pungent. So this person needs more pungent spices. And pungent is the word of action-oriented, and it's the word of fire. A simple pungent would be cumin, and a really, really intense pungent would maybe be like red chilies, you know, or habanero chile. So it can go from like really calm and just really deeply aromatic when you open the jar, like cumin, or it can go all the way to spicy. But if there's anybody who gets spicy spices or peppery greens like the arugula or watercress or mustard greens, these are all things that are very supportive for the person who runs cold and the person who runs dry. So a lot of these winter greens that survive the winter, at least here, like arugula, you know, and mustard greens, they'll both survive here, here in California. They're definitely, you know, something that come up in this time of year because they are very specifically supportive to our immune system when it gets cold outside, and they're warming. So we'll see that a lot. And that's why we see a lot of chilies at the end of summer too. You know, it kind of puts us into a cleanse and then make sure we're warm enough in our blood to make it through winter. Okay. And then the other thing we have here is sweet and we have salty. Okay. Now, sweet and salty are taste factors, just like pungent. We don't want to think this is table salt. You know, I have a really beautiful Trina Hydration, simple little $5.99 ebook that explains electrolytes and why we need salt. We just need it unprocessed. So it needs to have the name of a river or the name of an ocean, like Atlantic gray salt or Peruvian pink salt. Then you know that it's been unprocessed. So I often talk about salt in the way of like, we crave salt so bad. And in Ayurveda, we call it greed. It's called lavana. And people will be like, well, why is salt the word of greed? And I'm like, well, the only way I can think of it is to say, you know, keep in mind that, you know, you can't really eat one potato chip. You know, when we need salt, we need electrolytes, and our body will pretty much do anything to find it. In fact, you might find some not so good table salt making it into your mouth just because you want salt so bad. So trust your taste buds with good salt, unprocessed, and know that if you're really craving it, you actually need more. And when you need less, you'll crave it less. The other one that's interesting here is sweet, because a lot of people think of sweet as just sugar, and that's bad. In Ayurveda, they don't really see it that way. They see it, you know, as like eat it raw, and they get it straight from the cane. It's called jaggery. So if you're eating, again, unprocessed sweet, or if you think about, you know, fruit, which is very important in our diet for many reasons, here sweet has this very nourishing, grounding response, and it's great for rehabilitation, people who are depleted, or somebody who's been in a lot of shock, and that's exactly what they use it for in Ayurveda. And then you can make like a persimmon, you know, maybe you can make like a ginger, cinnamon, cardamom, persimmon compote, which is actually one of the things I'm making at my cooking class in January in my edible Ayurveda class. It's one of the recipes in my cooking class with Mary Sheila. So sweet, salty. Now, this is not meaning it's all you eat. The point is you would make your meal accordingly, and you would think about all the things you know in nutrition and what you're choosing to put on your plate, and then you would make sure that there was enough healthy salt and enough sweetness. So that can, you know, easily be, you know, something that has apricots in it or pomegranate or something of that sort. It doesn't have to be sugar itself. And anything processed here is not really going to be considered healthy for us. And here's some really good ones too. You know, you could think about more of the salty vegetables. Okay, so you don't have to just add salt if you're not comfortable. Think about the vegetables that are salty, which is wet and white. So jicama, bok choy, cauliflower, bean sprouts, celery, cucumber. These are all things that are naturally salty, and they're perfect little crunchy too for this person who might have more dry, cravings. And so then I'm like, well, how's crunchy, and make sure it's wet, like a cucumber or jicama, which is very different than choosing a chip or a cracker, which would truly be too dry for this person. Okay, then we have all of our beautiful plant medicine. Now, I really love putting my Western herbalism background into my meals. Like if I make a pesto, I'll make pesto with, fennel root, basil, and lemon balm. And it gives it this beautiful lemon citrusy finish. But I mentioned lemon balm here because it's a perfect example of a nervine blood building demulcent. So 3 of the words under that local plant medicine that lemon balm has to offer. And basil fits in this one too, as does that fennel root. And these are just going to be things that are like nourishing and demulcent. If you run dry, it's going to be really important that we make sure your cells can absorb water. And that means you're going to need a lot more nutrients to do it. Interesting, I always tell when somebody's vata and they're like, okay, but how wet? I'm like, well, your food should be so wet, it would roll off a plate. So you should eat out of a bowl. That's how wet your food should be. And it should be warm. And then you can put some raw, food on top and finish that way, or put your sprouts on top. And then here we're looking at just a few things, but it's hard sometimes for vata with the cold fear and the dry anxiety. A lot of times they need inspirational support that's going to be a little bit more about, get grounded and trust your destiny, and you can do this, and you know what you need. And so these are often the remedies, the warrior, they call them warrior remedies, the things that are going to really fire you up and get you engaged in your health and feeling like, no, you know what to do. Let's talk about a couple things to avoid, because these are our primary lists. So the things that you really want to consider avoiding are going to be anything dry and cold. So iced water, or maybe even iced cream. Dairy is pretty cold. Soy is pretty cold. It'll be less cold if you ferment it or culture it, but still runs cold. And this is also going to be anything too astringent, anything that literally is dry and looks dry, and crispy, crunchy, and again, too much raw. So these are the things and to consider. And I don't like no list. I think a no list sets people up for failure. And often the things that we are told we can't do, we find ourselves doing. So I think it's better to say no to avoid and just kind of have that consideration, that these are not the foods that are going to be beneficial. And if you are going to do them, like sometimes the vata person will say, no popcorn, what am I going to do? What, you can't take away my popcorn. And I'll say, well, could you do ginger tea with it? And could you do it, once a week, and could you maybe, not eat a whole bowl, like big bowl, like could you eat a little bowl? So there's always, again, a way to approach your health that is going to be like what feels right to you, and then what can you add to it. So you can put some tea in with that popcorn, and it's going to it's going to be like putting liquid on your compost pile, because that's really what our stomach is. It's a compost pile for us. So we need that alkaline, and we need that acidic, and we also need the liquid to turn that compost into what it's going to become. Okay, so here's our beautiful list. And there's another few avoids you can probably see there, but some of them are stimulants, like caffeine, or citrus, or too much corn. And these are things often that are known for the person who's born more vata constitution, that they know makes them either lose sleep easy or constipates them. And often with vata, if they get constipated, they won't be able to sleep well, because now there's upward motion in the body and it makes what they call monkey mind, versus when we are having bowel movements, it's downward motion. And that's what actually grounds us out and allows us to feel a certain level of completion and contentment. And so constipation is the #1 symptom of Vata, and these are the remedies that would really be supportive for that symptom itself. So let's keep going. And now we're going to look at Pitta, and we're going to look in the same way, same format. It's just we are now in the world of fire and water. So this is about times when you're not assimilating or absorbing well the organs of the stomach and the liver and also your spleen. So these are going to be things that would cool that liver down or would alkalize the stomach. But don't get too stuck on this word alkaline. We've made the word alkaline the ultimate word. And we've made alkaline this word that is like what we're supposed to be eating all the time. And I just want to remind us that Pitta needs that all the time. The more fire you got, the more alkaline you need. But if you run cold like the Vata, you're going to need a little warm up. And that alkaline food is just going to make more cold. But here we are with this beautiful Pitta. They are the person who should be thinking alkaline all the time. So I always think of diets and like who needs which one, or all these great things we're learning from nutrition out in the world. And then who's it right for, that information? You know, not all information is for all people. But Pitta, please go for it. And they need good, wet, nourishing food, but they also need raw. And, you know, Pitta is kind of known for, you know, burning the candle at both ends and working really hard and maybe even playing a little hard. They are of the intellect. So they're very like, let's get it done. And so they might snack on who knows what because they just want to keep working. And so they end up needing more detox. They need more detox foods. And that's where these, you know, considering unprocessed foods and making sure that they're wet and more roughage. We want the raw. And let's look at these beautiful spices here: mint, cilantro, dill, fennel, coriander, and turmeric. If you smell those, if you know any of those spices right now, and you can just take them into your nose because it's connected to limbic brain, that's where we store our emotions. So we're actually able to conjure up smell way better than we think we can. So even just consider like you're putting a mint leaf under your nose right now, or you're tasting fennel. These are cooling. And they usually kind of represent, when you look at them as a group, you're like, oh, they are colder than, you know, the other spices by flavor. And a lot of people call them kind of refreshing, you know, so usually we look at that as an idea of cooling. And we need bitters here. Bitters are cleansing. They start activating the breakdown and they dispel gases in the stomach. And they help us follow through getting any toxins out of our body that aren't serving us. And they also act as a catalyst for breaking down fats with the help of the gallbladder and your small intestines. So these are all things that are making sure that you're not getting too much fire rising, because that would cause inflammation. And here, let's look at them. So this is going to be aloe vera juice. It's called Kumari, #1 remedy in Ayurveda for Pitta. Half a cup of aloe, inner fillet only, every day. And that can be before bed because it would cool you down and help you get to a sleep much quicker, since these are people who think all night long about the next day. And they're good for cleansing the blood and the liver and helping with some of your immunity. So leafy greens, people always love that raw cacao beans are on this list, you know, but they are a brilliant bitter. And you want to think about things like dandelion greens and radicchio and endives. These are all things that are very, very cooling. And they even look like it when you're looking at them. Radicchio sometimes doesn't look quite as cooling because it's got that beautiful kind of red color, but really it's a purple, and purple is antioxidant. And so it is, again, oxygen is cooling. It's a cooling factor. And then we also need some astringent here. Astringent is not hard to find. So, you know, there's just some very specifics. And we use astringent. If you do eat some raw food, it's kind of in everything. But we only use small amounts when we know we need a really deep cleanse. So astringent is going to pull excess fluid out of the body and bind toxins. Some easy ones here that are going to be very hydrating: cucumber. The other one is borage flowers. All of our seeds, if they're raw seeds are very specific to astringent and helping with this alkalizing. And then we have unripe fruit. So, you know, the older the fruit is, the sweeter it gets. And again, we're not going to see sweet as a bad thing here because Vata needs them. But if, you know, if somebody said, what about fruit? I know that I would want, you know, maybe Vata would be better with ripe fruit, whereas Pitta is going to do better with that base bitter, that kind of sour bitter of unripe, you know. So a green banana is going to be very specific here, for instance. And the other astringent fruit here would be pomegranates, and goji berries and jujubes and cherries. These are all things that are very specific for Pitta. And then we have our plant medicine, and this is going to really take us into all of our bitters. And one of my favorite is linden flower. And there's another one that I keep around in my garden, which is all the salvias, sage. So it could be a cooking sage. It could be that beautiful shrub plant called hot lips salvia. Grows really easy in multiple terrains, and it's just a beautiful shrub. And it gives a beautiful variety in your food. And again, I'm going to go out and pick some of those medicinals, you know, whether it be the fresh mint or fresh lovage or hyssop. These are all things that are, you know, easy to grow in the garden, and they give you a very beautiful variety of flavor that you're not used to, because, you know, food can get boring if you're the one cooking it all the time. And so just really kind of playing that out. And the support here really is, you know, can you take control of your health as much? I'll often ask a Pitta client, can you take control of your health as well as you're taking control of your business? You know, can you consider that? You know, can you think of like, well, what if you put yourself first as your primary, you know, goal, you know, in the morning, even just for like the first half hour, and then go on about your day? And the one thing I know about Pittas is once they make healthy practices, they're really good at keeping themselves in scheduled routines, but they're going to have to create them as a routine. Otherwise, they're going to be like, oh, I'm too busy. Oh, I don't have time for that, you know? And so I really am all about helping them. Like, how do you make yourself your project? You know, and I give them a lot of 10-day incentive programs. So I'm like, okay, I want you to do aloe for 10 days. And then you prove to yourself whether it cooled you down or not, or did it help you with that skin rash or not? You know, you were noticing you were getting feverish and, you know, and just overheated in the day. You know, has that changed in 10 days? Usually if a Pitta can say, yes, that worked, they're going to bring it in and make it a routine for themselves. And then what are their avoids? Well, things that are acidic. So number one is going to be processed food, right? So processed food is our number one group of acidic. In fact, I think that's where we started saying alkaline is better and acidic is bad, was because when we process our foods, they become more acidic, and there's additives that change their chemistry, and they go into a more acid profile in their pH. But we do want to keep in mind, though Pitta doesn't need that acidic. Acidic means hot. So that's why they'd have to think about that. So they don't do as good with, say, tomatoes or spicy chilies every day. They really have to watch their oily or their fried foods. And they, you know, I have to kind of help them to kind of be like, you know, it'd be better not to just make a spoonful of peanut butter and move on, or a chunk of cheese and move on. Like, might be better to just sit for 15 minutes if that's all you got, and eat a salad, you know, and munch on some cucumbers while you're busy in the office, kind of thing, you know. So whatever they can do. And they also need water, because fire makes water boil and it evaporates. So think about putting those cucumbers and mint in the water. And if Pitta has something that's flavorful, they're all about it. But if I try to give them something that doesn't taste good, they're like, it didn't taste good, because they like things to be fun and playful and be good, taste good. Okay, so these are some of it. Now, chocolate's on this list. Sorry for all you, but you know, a pure chocolate, not raw cacao, totally different world than the raw cacao. So just keep it into the raw cacao nibs or the raw cacao powder. You know, if you are buying chocolate, you know, can you find one that's pure cacao? That type of thing. But once you start adding sugar and dairy and cooking the beans, you've got a more acidic profile. And same with coffee. And they don't do good with nightshades. So you do want to think about, like, you know, the tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, chilies, just really not the profile that is going to serve somebody who is running too hot and inflamed. Okay, let's keep going. Great. So here's our Kapha remedies. And let's remember, Kapha is water and earth. Water and earth is amazing when it's a river. You have a nice little earth river bank and there's water running through it. And you're just like, oh, it's so beautiful here, you know, but water and earth make mud. So this is the concept of Kapha, and this is where we get this word wet. Okay, wet is the idea of like mucus or things that have coagulated, something that's become sluggish, stagnant, or mucusy. These are the things that we want to think of. So as I say that, any food that is heavy or coagulates or gets sticky or makes mucus, looks mucusy, are things that are not going to be great for kapha. And so we'll get to that avoid list at the bottom. But, you know, you still need wet, hydrating food. So you still need soup. You could still do a stew. It's just a matter of what do you put in it. And the first thing you're going to put in it is a lot of spices. Like when I went to make this list, I was like, okay, let me do maybe my top, you know, favorites that just change kapha really quick. So I did black pepper, fenugreek, ginger, cinnamon, asafoetida, chilies, rosemary, and oregano. Basil's in this list too, but to be honest, when you look up the, you know, kind of the encyclopedias for Ayurveda, there is no spice that kapha doesn't get to eat. All of them build metabolism and build up blood, and kapha has a hard time with circulation, and they have slow metabolism. So you can go off on spices if you show up being somebody who has too much wet in your system. But these are the ones that are really going to serve you in breaking up mucus. They're expectorating, and they're cleansing, and they're slightly stimulating for your metabolism. Asafoetida is probably the most stimulating on that list. In fact, if you know you have low metabolism, or you already figured out you are kapha wet, you can pinch asafoetida on your tongue before and after meals, and it will do wonders for enkindling your what's called Jatar Agni, your primary stomach fire that's going to get you to really start churning your food and breaking it down into a liquid. So that's a very special one on that list. And just so you know, I carry most of these. I carry a lot of the more rare ones on your list. And then black pepper, I know you can get it in the store. So I leave that to the store to sell. But I do have asafoetida and many of the things there. And hopefully you're growing a few of these out in your yard too. Okay, so let's look at the taste factors. We need sour and we need pungent here. Okay, sour liquefies. Its whole job is to churn and turn things to liquid and to make sure that you have enough enzymes in your diet to really break down your food and complete the job. So what is sour? Vinegars like apple cider vinegar, or thinking about fermentation and cultures. And these are also going to be things like citruses and berries. So these are all things that are just going to be naturally sour in nature. I'm going to add one to that list. I'm surprised I didn't put it on here. It's my favorite one, which is Umabusha plum. So ume plum paste, you can buy it in the store, in the Asian section of your store, and ume plum paste. And what I do is I put that whole container, it's a 9-ounce container, I put it in one of those 32 ounces of apple cider vinegar, and then I add a tablespoon of Atlantic gray salt, and I make this sour, salty electrolyte dressing. It's like what I use for making salad dressings. I'll add it in with tahini or sunflower butter, and I'll make a dressing, or I'll just add olive oil and I'll make a lighter dressing. But that Umabusha plum, apple cider vinegar, and a little bit of the good salt, brilliant flavor. And it's also really great splashed on greens when you're cooking them. Yeah. But I talk about salad dressings here. Why? Because this person needs to eat raw. So as much raw food as you can get. Now, you can have a piece of fish or chicken if you eat meat, or you can have some beautiful, beans on your salad, but it'd be better to pair your proteins with a raw salad itself and really do a hearty big bowl of salad so you still feel satisfied. Kaphas do tend to be a little more heavy, and then they start relating heavy as more satisfying. So I always say, well, you might just need to eat double the amount of salad. I know that's what I started doing. Was I was like, well, I'm not satisfied. When I started really changing my diet in my 20s, I was like, what? I don't know if I'm going to survive. And then I was like, but I could eat double the salad. And then it was like, that's all I really needed. And really, that's still going to, match, if that was kind of mashed down, since it's, got a lot of air space, that's going to be, your plate of food. And then what are our plant medicine here? It's going to be stimulating, invigorating, expectorating, and purgative. So purgative, again, is going to help that metabolism. And it's going to help you to follow through to really make sure that you are clearing out your bowels from your stomach, breaking down your food. And so that's a really important one in considering just how much cleansing do I need. Okay, what does this need inspirationally? Because I think it's such a great little detail to talk about. So this person needs facing the situation. So sometimes the issue with WED is they're like, well, it didn't go the way I wanted, so I'm just going to back out. Or like, I don't know if I'm really going to finish this. I don't know. They just kind of get a little bit melancholy, which is one of their emotions around finishing. And so I usually like to say, hey, I want you to stay in your body, and I want you to stay motivated, and I want you to think whatever you start, you're going to finish. And that way they start realizing like, okay, I just need to face the situation a little bit more and be considering like, if I just stay with it, how good am I going to feel when I finish, And kaphas like to be satisfied. And unfortunately, they go for food for satisfaction. So I have to find other ways to help them feel satisfied in their life. And the more satisfied they are in their life, the less likely they are to pick food as their contentment and their satisfaction. And that way they make healthier decisions along the way. Okay, what are the avoids? I kind of mentioned them in the beginning, right? So these are going to be heavier foods. So got to watch the sugar or desserts, things that are cakey or doughy, or, thinking about bread. So this really is the person, if anybody, who should be gluten-free and maybe even dairy-free or raw dairy only twice a week type of thing. But if there's anyone who should be gluten-free or looking at their consumption of like bread, pasta, crackers, this is it. Doesn't mean you can't eat whole food that is still really grounded, like beans and legumes and lentils, and thinking about quinoa, or maybe thinking about buckwheat noodles instead of pasta wheat noodles, that type of thing. But they are going to have to consider the more sticky something can get, whether in the bowl or when cooking, the more sticky it's going to be in the body. And sticky things are going to take more metabolic function to break down your food. And I'm sorry, but kapha just doesn't have the metabolism to really churn that much stagnation when they're already stagnant. So just really think about the more heavy it is when you go to cook it, the more sticky it is when you cook it, or the more sticky it is when it sits in a bowl next to the, sink or something, the more sticky it's going to be in your body too. And then that's going to just help you to gauge that knowing to avoid. We also here look at, I don't see them written down, so I'll just make mention, but this is another person who doesn't need as much of the fried food, and they don't do good with nuts. This person doesn't do so great with eating nuts as like a snack in between, just like the cheese in between a meal. This person kind of needs 3 good coals on the metabolic fire, 3 meals a day, and really just as many spices and as much raw food as I can possibly help them get on their plate. And that's what's really going to help them feel more motivated and lighter on their feet. And pretty soon they'll even be lighter in their body. And so that's really what Kapha needs, because, the more heavy the body gets, the more kind of sluggish and I don't know, and then they just kind of like, I need to exercise. And I'm like, let's actually start with exercising your right to eat, to eat the food that's really going to serve you, and see if that doesn't give you the energy to actually get out of the house in the morning and take that walk and actually get some exercise. So I do find that healthy food for the right person is going to help you to get to some of those other routines that you're trying to develop in your life. And you can see our lovely little superfood drink here. So this is the person who is going to do great. If you want to snack in between meals, it should be a green drink. It should be something that's going to really boost you up. Okay, let's go on to the next page. Okay, so here, and we're not going to do this now, but here is the physical, and the next page is the emotional pages. And this is just where, you can start looking at the primary symptoms of cold, dry, hot, wet. Now, let's not confuse you, since this is broken down elementally. Okay, let me just be really clear. Cold and dry on this questionnaire is Vata. Hot is Pitta, and wet is Kapha. So you don't have to pick which one. You want to do the Vata, Pitta, Kapha checklist symptoms, and then you want to do the elemental checklist. And then you can see there's a little place to put your totals. And down at the bottom are a bunch of remedies that are specific to your needs. These are the emotional remedies, and the other page had the physical remedies, and it mentions different spices and things so you can know where to get started. It also mentions a couple non-alcoholic apothecary drinks, and if you're just wondering what are those doing on there, it's because you are actually here at the DeAnna Center, and I am sitting at our apothecary bar. And so we actually serve healthy drinks. And so, sometimes we have the questionnaire is just sitting here, and so somebody will come strolling up to the bar and be like, what is this place? And we always say, yeah, there's the questionnaire. You might as well get started, figure out who you are. And if you don't know what to drink, it'll kind of guide you, So we just make a little fun play on health. Let's keep going. Okay, so here is this idea of providing the opposite for better balance. And it goes back to that word I used earlier, which was Vera. And it starts with hot and cold opposites. So again, you could think about weather outside, and you could just match the season, but you really do want to think about your symptoms at hand, because we live life in season to season, so we don't always match the season. Or you might be living with a health condition, like what if you have an inflammatory autoimmune disorder, and it's might be getting cold outside, but you still have an inflammatory hot disorder. And that means you're going to have to, again, have a bowl of soup, but you're going to want to make sure there's those alkaline vegetables that are in there, or that you do, really simple, protein choices, things that are going to be easy to digest and are anti-inflammatory. So hot, cold is the primary opposite. It has been life-changing for me to be able to have this simple thing. It's up there with breathing in my world, because I really do live in simple ways, and I have found that it's kept me very healthy as the years have gone by. And I feel, lucky for that, but I also know I'm tracking myself on the regular. I call it my weather report. It's actually a sweet little thing I'm working on for next year. I'm launching a check your weather report app, so you can actually put in your symptoms, and it'll help you to actually get a weather report on where you're at and what can you do to make a change for the day. And so this is that idea of opposites, and just really being able to stop. And I do this in a few different ways. So once a week, I'm really into taking 3 to 4 hours to myself every week. And I layer in a whole bunch of different programs, health tools. I have a webinar called Weekly Restoration, and that's where you could see what do I do, and I teach you how to do them in that webinar. But I take this time, and when I take that time, I sit with myself and I say, am I hot or am I cold from this last week gone by? Okay, and like, why am I hot or cold? Am I emotionally hot but my body's kind of cold, or am I cold and I'm feeling fearful, cold? What's going on emotionally and physically from the week prior? And it's a way of me really making a focus week to week on how I'm going to approach my world and my life and my food. So if I know I was fired up, I need to know to chill out this week. Maybe lay low a little more. Maybe I don't use my voice quite as much. Maybe I know that I'm supposed to be more of a listener than I'm going to tell you how it is. And that's me doing the opposite. Well, food and spices and remedies are no different. So if I say I am cold this week, which I have been saying, which is rare for me, but I have been cold. And so I've been saying, I need warm food. So I find myself buying the watercress and the arugula, and I grab the daikon, daikon radish, and I juiced up some ginger and made some juiced ginger in a jar, and that way I can just put that in all my water and my tea, and I can throw it in my soup broth, just real quick. I can make a marinade with it too. So if you haven't juiced ginger and just put it in a jar and used it, it is so user-friendly, really high flavor profile for when you need a quick kick of warm. And it's not only good for warming the stomach, but it's really good for moving excess inflammation out of the body. So you're not just building a big fire, you're actually moving old fire and warming up your blood. So if there was any warm spice you'd want to keep around for when you are cold and wanting an opposite, ginger would be my go-to. And then the opposite of that cold, right? So what if I said I was hot? Which is what I usually am saying. Well, then when I go to the store, I want to buy the fennel root, and I want to grab those cucumbers, and I want to make sure I have some fennel seeds to cook with. And maybe I, make sure that I buy a few more cucumbers and munch on those. Oh, wait, those are cold foods. If I want, yeah, those are the cold foods. Look, I'm like, okay, wait, I usually talk about warm next, because I usually talk about cold first, because I'm usually like, I'm hot, let's start there. But yeah, so you're going to do the cucumbers and the fennel, and you're going to think about getting a bundle of cilantro and make a cilantro pesto. Versus when you are running cold, you want a warming basil pesto. So really, it's just a matter of where am I at for the week? How did my last week go? And then am I hot or cold? And I'm just going to focus for the week. And then if something changes and I get cold, then I get to eat more warm food. Or if something changes and I get hot, I get to eat more cooling food. Now that's just the first part. There's another part of these opposites, and it is going to be looking at dry and wet. So here's where it's a little different, because if, hot, cold, cold, hot. But here it's a little different because it's dry. And if you're dry, you need wet, but it's the word nourish, because wet is a little hard to figure out what to do. You need nourish when you're dry. And when you're too wet, which is that word of, water, earth makes mud, then you're going to need more cleanse. So the next question is, do I need nourishing Or do I need cleansing? Or I'm going to ask myself, am I feeling dry and depleted and kind of empty, and I feel a little crunchy and my nerves are a little shot? Those are signs of dry. Having a hard time sleeping, and I can be like, yeah. So then I'm going to be like, okay, nourish this week. This week is all about it. Or I'm going to be like, am I kind of sluggish and feeling kind of sticky, and I just don't have a lot of, motivation, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know. Well, then I need to cleanse. I need to stir the pot. I need to cleanse things up and make sure that I'm really doing those motivating foods. And so this is that idea again. Am I hot or am I cold? Decide. And am I dry or am I sluggish and wet? Decide. And then do the opposite. So this week I said I was cold and I was dry. So all week I've been eating more warming, nourishing foods. And that's my goal for the whole week. Warming, nourishing, warming, nourishing. I know my husband's been enjoying it because his primary constitution is eating warming, nourishing, which for me, my normal is cooling, cleansing. So we're actually opposites ourselves. So we always have to think about how we're going to eat together. But that's really what you want to think about, is just this idea that you can always stop. And I do this in restaurants too on the daily. So like say I end up in a restaurant, and I don't always eat in restaurants. I like to, but I try to avoid it or think about being really smart about when I do that, right? And so if I end up in a restaurant, I might be like, what am I going to choose? I could eat whatever just sounds good, but what if it's not exactly the right thing for me? So I always sit with the menu, and I just sit there and I just say, okay, DeAnna, are you hot or cold? Are you wet or dry? And I just answer the question. And the more you know your symptoms and the more you play with that questionnaire, this is going to get really easy. I mean, I teach this to kids, and then they start saying, Mom, I'm too cold for that. And they're like, thanks, DeAnna. But it's good, because it's simple. They're things that we think of all the time. And so I'll just kind of consider, and then I'll look at my menu and I'll start saying, okay, I need warming and nourishing. So what am I going to have here? I think I might have the bean soup. I don't necessarily need a salad. It's more my go-to. It's cooling, cleansing, but I don't really need that right now. So I need the soup, that might be a better choice for me. And it really helps you to enjoy a meal, but still be playing with a concept that's going to keep you healthier no matter where you are, and kind of, what life is throwing you, because life isn't always just, I'm going to buy the perfect food, take it home, I'm going to cook it perfect at the perfect time, perfect amount, and then my health is going to be perfect forevermore. So I just want to give us a reminder that, we inevitably leave the world. We inevitably end up in a health situation on some level at different times in our life, so it's really nice to be able to have these things that will allow you to listen. And that's really what this is about. It's like, can you really trust that your body is speaking to you and it's communicating and it's telling you what you need, and you really can decide where you're at, hot, cold, wet, dry, and you can do the opposite. And that's really the beauty of this balancing act that we call life, right? It is quite the balancing act on the daily. So it's going to take you wanting to play with that idea a little bit to be able to go with the flow of that balancing act. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, good. So here we don't need to, this I pretty much covered in the other part too. Let me just tell you what's on this page, and let's make sure we get to our spices. But here is pretty much an overview of your hot, cold, wet, dry, and it even starts telling you just simple little things at the bottom that you can do. So if you are cold, you need hot. Dry needs wet, hot needs cold, wet needs dry. And then it even tells you just the simplest things that you can do. Like you might need exercise if you're running cold, take a bath, drink warm liquids, practice breathing. Dry, you need electrolytes. You need to, eat soup and stews, and you need to maybe get some oil on your body and make sure you have some coating of nourishment on your skin. And that hot was really simple too. Drink the cucumber, eat a cucumber, drink the mint water, things we already talked about. And then the wet is going to show you that's where you might want to make a green drink. You might want to do a salt scrub. You might want to think about getting enough exercise to break a sweat, because that always builds the metabolism. Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, so this is a really great one too. And what I think I'm going to focus on here, and this I actually did in the last class also, but these are just some healthy habits to consider when you're out in the world and you're just living life and you're trying to do the best you can. And I'm not going to, you can kind of go over them later. But some of my favorite ones there is, making sure you start your day with electrolyte water. So you build up your water count first thing in the morning. The other one I try to do is I try to consider eating vegetarian when I eat out. And I try to also do dairy-free, because if I can do vegetarian dairy-free when I'm in a restaurant, I'm going to probably get the healthiest possible outcome from that meal. So I try to eat dairy and meat. If I'm going to do it, I try to know exactly what source it's coming from so I can track, not being full of antibiotics or hormones. But those are some of my favorite ones there. But I want you to look at those later and really start considering just some really simple things you can do to start building healthy habits. Let's keep going. Okay, here we are in the spices. So what I thought I'd do, because this is one of those lists of spices that you might want to print out and you might want to just start learning it, because these are the heating cleansing, but this is the list you're going to see in here. And I'm just going to talk about like 6 of my favorite spices, and then you can grow into this handout. I broke them down into the plants, the spices that are heating, cleansing, heating, nourishing. And then I did the list of cooling, cleansing, cooling, nourishing. So no matter what combination you end up finding you were at when you do your weekly weather report or you're checking in with the meal day to day, you can start thinking about what is the smartest medicine to add to my food. So I just called spices medicine. And they literally are the #1 medicine in Ayurveda. I don't know if you've ever looked up cinnamon or cardamom and turmeric, but those are very main spices, and they are really incredibly good for cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders. I mean, very, very well researched. And we're talking about spices. So these are really what are going to spice up your life, bring flavor to the table. They're going to allow you to eat globally, which is one of my favorite things about it. I can think about, where do I want to go in the world? Let's really think about that right now in a pandemic, because we don't really have the right to travel abroad in the same way. And so it's like, I want to be able to still go global because I love to travel. And spices give me that ability. So let me tell you one of my favorite spices of all time. I'm not kidding. And I sell so much of it, it's kind of ridiculous. You can get it on my website. So everyone I'm going to mention are going to be a little out of the ordinary to make it fun here. I want to really spice it up. But they're going to be easy to work with. Okay, I don't want to give you difficult things to start with that are new. Sumac. Okay, Sumac. Sumac is so brilliant. It is this ground up berry. Okay, it's not poisonous sumac from California. It's sumac that comes out of East Africa all the way down into Middle East and that whole region. And you do see it in some Eastern European regions too. But where you've probably seen it before is sprinkled on top of, say, a baba ganoush or hummus, and they put it in dolmas, those stuffed grape leaves. But sumac, you don't have to make Middle Eastern food to work with it. It tastes incredible on everything. And it is sour, salty, bitter, and it is cooling, and it is nourishing because it's full of electrolytes. So speaking of hydration and staying juicy, but also keeping things liquefying and really moving through your system, that is the beauty of sumac. And the moment I start I'll make someone, if somebody's like, I'm hungry, I'm like, let me just make you a little tiny bowl of, quinoa, and I'll put some lemon and some olive oil, and I'll put a whole bunch of sumac on there, and somebody will be like, what did you do to this quinoa? I have never tasted it taste this good. And it's just that sumac, and people get very addicted. I mean, they'll even be like, do you have a 5-pound bag I can buy? Because I also have a beautiful source, and it's just so clean and fresh, but it's got that little tart, sour, salty. And that's a beautiful combo. It's used all over the world, this idea of sour and salt together. Hydrating, liquefying, and slightly in between, kind of cleansing and nourishing. So I say it's like no matter what list it's on, usually it's something that pretty much anyone can take in because it is only warm. It's just like right in the middle, but flavor, oh, so good. The other one I'd like to talk about is going to be Methi Leaf. Okay, Methi Leaf is fenugreek leaf. Now, when you buy it, and it's one of those I have, but it's like when you buy it and you smell it, you're going to be like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like much. But when you go to make a stew broth with it, and you'll probably love my labels because they have instructions, like not only what culture did I get it from, like I want you to know where I bought it from. I want you to know what it's good for health-wise. I want you to know what part of the plant, which, this would be the leaf of the fenugreek plant, Methi, Methi. And I also always give you like, how much do you use? Like Methi would be 1 tablespoon in a pot of soup stock, or say 2 cups of beans, or 2 cups of a grain or rice. So very forgiving to be able to put a whole tablespoon, but it gives you this beautiful, beautiful green little flecks in there, and it's bittersweet. It doesn't even seem very bitter. Most people are like, this is otherworldly. Like, what is this flavor? They can't put their finger on it. And the reason for that is because Methi is in everything that you find through Asia, and especially in India, but it's not, you don't find it in the store here. So when I found a source for Methi, I was like, oh man, this is a game changer. And it is. It's incredible. Very forgiving spice, just like the sumac. And it's going to just bring a very mysterious, sweet, kind of all around beautiful finish to just about any meal. And you can do a simple saute. It doesn't take a long simmer. So I'll throw it in with, a bunch of spinach, and I'll saute it in with the spinach or kale, or some saute of whatever, if I'm steaming vegetables. And I also throw it in marinades. So very, very friendly spice, but great for the liver, great for blood building, and it's a really good one for spleen immunity. So I have been doing a lot of Methi just because it keeps the lymphatic system flowing, which is your immune system. We have 2 names for one system. Our lymphatic system is our immune system. So very important for us to know what our immunity does. And also how to keep our immunity really healthy. Okay. Maybe we'll change the page just to, they can be looking at maybe a few other things. Oh, look at this beautiful long list of heating, nourishing. Now think about this. Spices are naturally heating, but I don't want you to think heating is a bad word. So I did try to tell you if it was like hot or just kind of warm, just so you can have a little variation on what that heat level really is. And I'm going to go through, oh, here's the other one I wanted to talk about, right at the top of this page, Amchur. Amchur, if you don't know how to make the flavor of a lassi, and it's that sour tart finish and it's super sweet. So this is sweet and sour, whereas the sumac was sour salty, and Amchur is mango seed powder. And again, I have it, not easy to find, but it's in so many different medicinal applications in Ayurveda. You can find Amchur in all kinds of really, really precise formulations for disease states. And then you're also going to find it right in the kitchen being utilized. And they do a lot of desserts with it. So it really leans itself to a little bit more of a sweeter flavor. And that's why they put it in yogurt to make it more sour, or they'll, add it in with a compote of fruit, or they'll sprinkle it right on fruit. And it just gives this extra little tartness. And it is just incredibly good for building the metabolic rate. And how do we do that? We do it because it's highly enzymatic. So this is a really high enzyme profile spice that you could be thinking. And again, forgiving. I'm trying to give you a list of spices that are new, perhaps, and then also ones that are not going to ruin a meal if you overuse them. And I'll just give you a hint on one of those, which is Asafoetida. So Asafoetida definitely will ruin a meal if you don't do one little pinch at a time, and it kicks a real heat punch for the gut. So you only need a little bit anyway, but I'm sure you can just sprinkle it on and just really go for it. And they do use this as a metabolic tea. They do 2 teaspoons of amchur in warm milk. You can do whatever milk you want, coconut, oat, raw dairy, whatever works for you. But they do a little milky amchur tea, and it's good for the metabolism and calming the gut down when it's having cramps. Yeah, so amchur is a very, very special one. Let's go ahead and go to another page. And let's look at a cooling cleansing. Now we had one of those, which was that the cooling cleansing. Let's see which one. There's the Methi Leaf on the cooling cleansing, but which one do I want to choose here? I want to talk about grapefruit peel, but I also want to talk about Tulsi. Tulsi is holy basil. So maybe what I'll say about Tulsi, because it's a blood tonic, so it's good for pretty much everybody. It's considered tridoshic. But Tulsi is a basil. And a lot of people make Tulsi tea, and it just tastes incredibly fabulous, but nobody cooks with it. And it's a very, very beautiful stew pot, or again, a marinade leaf. And you can buy it dried. And again, it's not going to taste like a lot when it's dry, but when you get it in that stew or you start making a broth with it, it just makes this deeply, almost slightly floral, but absolutely a basil, but it's got a little bit more of a beautiful floral finish as a basil. And it's a little sweeter than the other basils too. And then I'm going to make mention of grapefruit peel too in this list, because grapefruit peel is underutilized. And I'm going to say that for all the peels. Like when I peel something, lemon, lime, orange, grapefruit, I just put it on the mandolin and I make it into really, really thin little slices. And then I lay it on a cookie sheet and I bake it on low in the oven until it's completely crispy and fully dried out. If there's any moisture, it's going to go moldy, but you just roast it really slow and low, and your whole room smells like lemon peel or grapefruit peel. It's just incredibly comforting. And then you just put that in a little jar. That's why they have to be dry. And you just take out a couple little pieces of the grapefruit peels, and you add it into a soup broth. You add that into a marinade. I'll crunch it up and grind it into a powder, and I'll put it into a salad dressing. And you just get this roasted grapefruit, kind of citrusy, And it makes it just a little bit, a little bit of the sugars come out too. So it's just got this sweet, slightly sour, astringent finish, and it just makes such a beautiful, beautiful, refreshing flavor on pretty much anything. And I just think that's something, you don't need to be buying that. You just need to slice up your peels that you might be throwing away, or, you can compost a few of them, but not many. But, they go to waste, and they just are incredibly good. And what I use them a lot for is pickling and canning and compotes, things that I'm going to put in the cupboard for winter. And then I'll come across this roasted grapefruit peel, and it just, it's divine. I love it. Let's go to the next page. I know we're here at 5:30. So here's some cooling, nourishing, and a lot of these are Ayurvedic herbs. There's not as many cooling, nourishing in the world of spices. So I like to mix it up and do like shatavari as asparagus rhizome. It's actually the asparagus fern that a lot of people have as house plants, and it's like one of the prized tonics in Ayurvedic medicine. So keep that in mind. But shatavari, you could lose that flavor, but you could add a whole bunch of medicine into your meal. And let's keep going and see what we've got left here with our time. And I believe this might be one of our last pages here for the day. And what I did is I just thought it'd be good to have a list of spices that build metabolic fire. And the reason this is really being mentioned here is I just often think the stomach gets overlooked. Everybody wants to take care of their liver and their kidneys and their lungs, and like those are all very important. They're vital organs. But everything starts with your mind and your emotions, and then we eat our mind emotions, and then everything, depending on how much you chewed it, and what your energy was when you ate it, and then we have to compost, break down everything in our stomach. And the better your stomach does its job, the better your small intestines can do its job, your colon can do its job, your gallbladder, your liver, your spleen, your kidneys, your lung, your heart, everything. So if you have good stomach health, you actually are more likely to have whole body health, because that's where everything breaks down and gets started right from the get-go. So these are all the spices that are going to give you that stomach churn, and they're going to make sure that you're activating those enzymes and what's really the transit time of the gut, making sure that things are actually moving through, turning to liquid, moving through within 45 minutes to an hour is really good transit time for the stomach. If it's sitting too long, or if it sits and putrefies, or if you're hungry 30 minutes later, these are all things that would then be symptoms of the stomach not being in full balance. And so here's your list, and probably my favorite one on there is going to be curry leaf. And curry leaf is not curry powder. It's from the curry tree. That's a whole nother story, and we don't have time for that one, but it's the curry tree, and it's incredibly aromatic, and it's also a very forgiving spice. And you can just take like a handful of them, literally. You could take a little handful of those long little curry leaves, and you can throw that again in a soup stock. And I do a lot of curry and methi together. That's like my favorite combo. So I'll just do methi and curry, and I'll throw it in with my quinoa and leave it alone. And then my whole house just smells like I'm in some far off land on vacation, doing nothing. And really, I'm preparing my meal with a whole bunch of medicine on it. So yeah, those are some of my favorite spices, but I really invite you to grow into this list of spices. And, don't get them all and then get overwhelmed. Maybe buy 2 or 3 and, play. Or what if you look at this list and you get in your spice drawer, wherever your spices are, and you actually are like, oh my gosh, I have coriander, I have cumin, I have nutmeg, I have cinnamon. Well, right there, you have 4 spices on this list that are just sitting in your cupboard waiting to get utilized. And again, might as well play. And you're only going to mess up a meal once, and you won't do it again. And then you'll learn, and the chances of doing that are actually really, really low. So I just want you to kind of get those flavors in there and think, do I need heating or do I need cooling? And do I need nourishing or do I need cleansing? And then you'll be able to make your meals from there in more balanced ways. Yeah.
All right, DeAnna. All right.
How'd I do, Paula?
Fabulous. I think as one attendee just said, it's getting delicious in here.
Oh,
I think
I'm
we're
so
all
glad.
drooling and salivating and
I
getting
hope
hungry.
so.
So, Andrea just posted, and I put it out to the audience, that you're having an Ayurvedic cooking day on January
Yes.
10th. And so if you want a little bit more, a little more depth, then how are you going to do that? Are you going to do it
We're
virtual?
doing virtual. Yeah. And when you sign up, you get your shopping list, and we even have a little video that helps you prep your kitchen. So you're all like getting engaged with us. And we are doing a virtual cooking class, and it's amazing how well it goes. And
Right.
then the afternoon is a little more education. We'll do some conversations around food and nutrition.
All right,
Yeah,
terrific. All right, you ready for some questions?
I sure am.
Stay on asparagus leaf for a minute. Does it matter if it's male or female?
I do not think so. In fact, I'm almost positive, because I was with Dr. Gupta in India, and this question came up actually, and they were saying you need the female because it's for female reproductive issues. And Dr. Gupta actually interjected and said, actually, that's not true. You can use either one, doesn't matter. And he also made big mention that it's just as much of a male virility plant as it is a female tonic. And so it's actually a plant we use for reproductive, both genital urinary and female reproductive. And yeah, which of the female or male doesn't matter. So I'm glad I could answer that question. Thank you,
Right.
Dr.
Additional
Gupta.
fabulous research. Yeah, Dr. Gupta, love that. Um, and then harvesting the leaf, would it be best to do that as soon as the asparagus starts leafing out, or can you do it through the fall?
You can do it through the fall, and we're not eating the leaf of that. We are eating the root. So if you have it in a house plant, for instance, and you want to start partaking, it's not going to be as fruitful, just in the way that those roots, they grow really, really long and stretched out in the garden,
Yep.
and
Yes.
you're collecting small amounts. So you're going to want to get it in the ground. But yeah,
Right.
you could pretty much harvest it at any time, and you're going to notice that the flavor profile doesn't even change in the root from season to season.
All right, I wanted to clarify something on the questionnaires. There was a question from the audience of, do they fill out all 4 sections?
You fill out everything. At the top of that questionnaire, there's a little, like, I even said it, there's a little APB up there that says, like, please consider chronic or acute. Like, how are you taking this, test? So if you want to just, where are you at right now, then answer acute. But yes, because at the bottom of that questionnaire, there's totals. So you're going to total up each list, and you're going to see what's the highest total.
Mm-hmm.
And then it tells you which is the most imbalanced. So you want to do all the lists, but think, like, are you thinking long term, like, oh, constipated? Not right now, but are you normally, then you want to answer it accordingly.
All right. Good point on that. Thanks. So back on spices a minute. I don't know if anybody else is noticing, but there's a really diminishing supply in our stores right now during COVID. Have you noticed that? I mean, you get them out of your own stores and resources, but
Gosh, I don't know that. I can't tell you that the main suppliers that I go through, I don't have any back stock on anything.
mm-hmm.
So I know I'm able to actually get all my spices that I need in my store. So I'm not sure why they would be low in the store. Yeah.
Even peppercorns, cardamom, these really basic things. It's just there's hardly, it's just not
Perhaps
being restocked.
perhaps it's an import issue,
Hmm.
and
Certainly
my
that.
suppliers already are still working off their supply or something.
Right.
'Cause
We'll see. See if I can find out anything more about
I
that.
have them.
Yes, that's good. I'm going shopping at DeAnna's store. Um, the electrolyte dressing, Umabusha plum paste. Will you give the recipe again, that and the amounts?
Yes, this is one of my favorite things. So in Ayurveda, anytime you do a medicated vinegar, it's called a draksha, Drakshha. So this is making of an Ayurvedic medicinal vinegar, draksha. And what you're going to do is you're going to buy one of those 32 ounces, the larger size of the apple cider vinegar, and you're going to get the raw unfiltered. And what you will need to do that I did not mention is you'll need to take like maybe a half a cup of that vinegar out of the bottle because it's full and you're going to be adding an ingredient. So you just need to take a little bit out of there and make room.
Yeah.
Then you are able to buy, and it's from Eden Foods. They're the only people that I see making it, and it's called Umabusha plum paste. And they sell it in these little 9-ounce containers. And you can get the paste. You can also sometimes just get the plums and you can puree it really easy, like with a fork. So if you can only find the plums or the paste, doesn't matter. You can make it a paste. And you put that entire 9-ounce container in your jar of apple cider vinegar. And you add a tablespoon of good salt. You could do Atlantic Gray, or you could do Celtic, or you could do like local Sonoma salt. As long as it's got the name of an ocean or a river, you know that it was sun-dried and it was processed with all its electrolytes intact. That's kind of how people prize their electrolyte salts from around the world, is naming them off the ocean that they reside at. Yeah, and then that's it. And really what I do is, if you really want to get the most, you could start eating that. But if you let it sit for 2 weeks, not in the fridge, and you really want to go for it, it'll become like a mother ferment, and you'll see like a little, fermentation at the bottom. And you always shake it before you use it. And then I've been using the same bottle, mother ferment bottle, forever. I mean, I don't even know how long at this point. Probably a good 20 years. So yeah, so then it'll get down to, just about an inch at the bottom of the container. And then I'll pour in more apple cider and I'll throw in my next umabusha and my tablespoon of salt. And then I don't have to wait another 2 weeks. It just keeps that ferment, starter going.
What a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's really tasty.
There is switching here, but there's a question about saunas. I know you got far and fur infrared at DeAnna Center, but what do you think about using saunas in Ayurveda, and for hot or cold or wet or dry?
Okay, well, in Ayurveda, we have a whole entire routine with what's called swedana, which is where they often call the origin of the word sweat, swedana. And there are so many different forms of how to sweat. I mean, you could be on a cot and there's like you're mudded and there's a fire pit under you, or it could be like our, sweat lodge style. And then you have your steam sauna, which is your wet sauna. And then you have the sauna itself, which is a dry sauna. So if we look at those opposites from what we learned, if you run dry, you need the wet steam room. If you run wet, you need the dry sauna. So there's kind of how we look at it. Do you need a wet sauna or a dry sauna? And it's always the opposite of what's going on for you. And then the question about the near and the far infrared is an interesting one. And I am going to tell you there's a fair amount of controversy, so I can only give you really my opinion. But I mean, I do have a bathhouse, so I know a fair amount about it. But there is some interesting controversy. So the far infrared is, it's like I always say it's like a slow bake. So you have to be in there for a fair amount of time, and you're doing this really slow, and it's driving itself into the tissues, and then you start sweating when it hits the bone and starts pulling toxins from the bone out. But it's slow you go, you know, and so that's just a different concept. So I find it to be a milder experience, and if you detox really heavily, I think far infrared is a better way to start. And then you have your near infrared, and near infrared, it is a little bit, you know, it's quick and ferocious, you know, there's literally big red lights on you, and it is just penetrating to the bone really, really quick, and you are breaking a deep sweat as quickly as you can, and then you're getting out quicker. So they do the same thing. A lot of people say they do completely different things. They do the same thing. They do it in different rates. And in a little bit, like, you know, the near infrared is very like quick and penetrating and like really melts things down. So if somebody has weight they want to lose, you'd go in the near infrared. But if you need to cleanse but you run dry, you would want to go in the far infrared and be a little gentler on yourself. Yeah, I think that's why they sell more far infrareds and they don't sell near infrareds. You usually have to, like, you know, build one.
Yeah.
Because they're not as safe for people. Yeah, you have to know what you're doing in the near infrared.
Yeah, it's true. All right. I think we can end on this last question. It's come up a little bit here about what if you're a blend of doshas?
We are,
blend, you know, a combo, or
we are a blend of doshas. I love this question. So yeah, it's not even what if I am, we are. So like, for instance, I'm a Pitta Kapha. So I'm of hot and I'm wet. So if I'm hot and wet, I want to avoid the hot and wet, no to avoid lists. So I have two lists I want to avoid. I don't want to mimic myself. And then if I'm hot and wet, it means I innately need cold and cleanse. And I get to add both those lists. So you often end up with like two lists that you want to avoid and kind of pay attention to, and you end up with two lists that are really, really good for you, and it gives you more options on foods to eat. But absolutely, we're combos. And then I always have to remember, when I'm not feeling very wet, I don't have to avoid those foods, or I don't have to, you know, think about it as much. I can give myself a little leeway, or if I'm not too hot, I give myself a little leeway, you know. But for the most part, yeah, you're adding in two and you're taking out two lists there. So please do not put yourself in one of the boxes and just make yourself a Vata or a Pitta or a Kapha, because we aren't. You know, we all have lungs and kidneys and livers, and that means we are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. But I will tell you one other little detail. If I'm telling you I'm a Pitta Kapha, it means the word you say first, Pitta, is your biggest weakness that you can turn into your biggest strength. But you need to know that word. If I say I'm Pitta, I'm telling you I'm fiery. You know what I mean? And if I tell you I'm Kapha Pitta, well, then I have more Kapha first. And that's my primary weakness. So that's how we say those words. But guess what? Pitta Kapha, I have to pay attention. But Vata is my most stable. So like, I don't have very many of those Vata symptoms at all. You know, like I don't go to anxiety as quickly as someone else who is Vata. I don't get constipated. It's not my go-to. You know, I sleep good, that type of thing. I have my own issues. I have Pitta Kapha issues, but but
we
the
don't go
Vata,
there any deeper.
but you know, the Vata is going to be the one that like is not what I have to worry about. And so it's what we call the stable one for you.
Okay.
So,
And do you see the doshas, the dominance of the dosas changing in lifespan as we age?
well, Well, yes. I mean, we're born with our primary constitution, and that really is going to be connected to the genetics. How much hot, cold, wet, dry, how much Vata, Pitta, Kapha is in your family, in your blood. So, that's where I say I'm Pitta Kapha, and that's my genetics. Then we have the timelines. So we come in what they call Buddha babies, all juicy and squishy. I mean, that's kind of, what everyone's looking for, because it means you're padded in the world, as this place is a little crazy probably coming in. So we're a little cushioned and padded and we're juicy. And that's kind of what we look for. And so we're in this very kapha time of life. Now, I'm not going to say this is how every life or person's life looks, but this is the concept. And we're in that kapha until we become prepubescent. And the early stage hormones, used to be 9, 10 years old. Now it's a little bit more like 8, and that is when we start coming into our fire and our emotions, and we're having different feelings. And we go into the longest stretch of our life, if we're lucky to live that long. And that longest stretch of life is Pitta. So from like puberty all the way to what they say is like around 45 is Pitta time of life. It's the get it done, focused time of life. And then we start waning. We are getting closer and closer to the ethers. And so we go into our later time of life, what we think of as like the changing of our times. They call it pause to change. That's what they call menopause. Pause to change. You are now running on wisdom. And you have to know your timelines, and you got to think about how much juice do you actually have versus the juice you used to know. And that is Vata time of life until we, inevitably wither away and leave the world, and we actually go back to the ethers. So it actually goes Kapha, Pitta, Vata in our lifespan. Yeah.
This has been fabulous. This is exactly what I hoped for. Everybody wanted you to come back for exactly this, DeAnna, to pull it all together and show us our paths forward for finding our balance and those that we work with. It's been a beautiful thing. Thank you for that.
So much. Thank you for
I'm
having
glad
me.
You bet. And I'm glad it was recorded so that we can all listen to it again. The handout will be included with the recording, and then we have all of the slides that are separate pages of the handout. The reminder that DeAnna does consultations. You're doing them virtually right now, even though the center will start to open some this weekend. So, and you had some special practitioners there. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we have 2 wonderful doctors who have moved to Sebastopol, and we are doing some beautiful work together. They're called MD Ayurveda. It's a medical doctor and an Ayurvedic physician, and they are opening a Panchakarma retreat center here in Sebastopol. And their place is being built and renovated right now, but they have clients in need, and they got essential permits for Sonoma County. And they're actually using the entire facility right now doing Panchakarma retreats, which also includes the steam room, the sauna. Everything is UV sterilized and sanitized, and it's all one person at a time. But we actually are taking care of people in need, and we have 2 doctors here who have the right to do so. And then I'm also doing the remote consults, and I can get a lot done in a very short amount of time if you're needing my support. But I do invite you to consider looking at their website and the DeAnna Center. So you can go to DeAnnaCenter.com, and you can also go to MDAyurveda.com. And you can see those doctors and see if it feels right, and they're happy to talk with you. And then the doctors will be here during our open hours. So we are opening for the month. Our store, we've got it all ready. It opens tomorrow, and it's Wednesday through Saturday from 11 to 6. And this is a big deal because we have been closed for almost 10 months now.
I know it is a really big deal. Bravo to you, and blessings on all of it being successful and safe.
Yeah.
So for the store, for those that aren't local, to be able to come into the center
Yeah,
or to
go to
access the
DeAnna.
spices.
Yeah, go to DeAnnaCenter.com, and up on the top, you're going to see the store. And you go to the store and it'll, do you want to look at immunity or tissue health or all the spices or the salts or my essential oils? And you can shop all you want. And we have a really good turnaround. We're pretty quick. We get it out in about 2 days' time. So anything you get is going to get right to you. And we have very educational labels. So everything on our labels is about teaching you what to do with the item you bought. And so that'll be really great when you go to get the spices, and just, how you're going to start playing with those. And it'll be right there on the label.
Thank you so much, DeAnna, for all of this. And I have some closing comments for you all. Just take a couple more minutes. Again, this was recorded. It'll be up on our website in just a few days. And there's also a survey that I'm going to ask you to fill out right after the webinar ends. If you appreciated this webinar and the two parts of it as much as I did, I'd like to hear about it. I'd like to hear anything you have to say about this or anything in our webinar series. I appreciate your feedback and your comments. It helps so much. And I really appreciate you taking the time for that. So after tonight, we're going to take a webinar break. This is our last webinar for 2020. We will come back in January 2021 with whatever is next. The schedule is getting filled now. Hey, if anybody has ideas, a topic that you're really interested in, I want to know. This is for you. And our next All About Alumni, our All About Alumni is our graduate interview series, and I have the fantastic opportunity of interviewing a graduate once a month for about 45 minutes. And so tomorrow, Wednesday, December 2nd at 12 noon, we're going to have graduate Ginger Huda. And she's presenting about her post-grad activities, her accomplishments, as well as her challenges. So it's a good one to tune in to for sure. And again, like our webinars, we've had so many previous terrific grad interview presentations. So check those out in our archives. They're truly inspirational and motivational. The way they're using their Hawthorn education astounds me. It's a beautiful thing. So that's it. It concludes today's presentation. I want to thank James Bernardinelli, who engineers for these webinars. Thank you, James. And thank you again, DeAnna. And thank you, everybody, for sharing this educational experience with us. I want to wish you all the best of health, and I look forward to learning more together in Hawthorn's webinars and our All About Alumni and inside Hawthorn's doors in the classrooms. So until then, till we meet again, I would just want to say I'm going to continue to mind my Ayurvedic health, as well as a little bit of compassion and a whole lot of kindness, because what we practice grows stronger. So I'm encouraging you to join me in this too, and in all ways that matter. Stay safe, be well. Thank you, everybody.